everyone. I feel like because I've done this so much through PALS, like I want to like launch into my PALS intro, and I'm like, nope, I am not a PALS person at this moment. But hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. This is a very special occasion. I am your host, Catherine D. Morgan. I am a writer and also a bookseller at PALS City of Books, located in Portland, Oregon, and also employee of bookshop.org as well. Today we're doing a special event with bookstore romance because we want to specialize in talking about the HarperCollins union strike. And this is, of course, proceeds were donated to that. If you want to continue donating to the cause, we, of course, want to, support that as well. And we have some amazing authors who will, I'll introduce them by telling them their name, and then they'll give you a quick spiel of who they are. And then we'll just launch right in, if that's okay with everyone. Perfect. So, Olivia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Olivia Waite. I write queer historical romance, science fiction, and fantasy. I'm also the New York Times Book Review's romance fiction columnist, which is very exciting. We just got to do the first ever New York Times Year's Best Romance Novel list. So that is up. It's very exciting. You're going to see some familiar names on it.
Perfect. And then Kat Sebastian.
Sure, I'm Kat Sebastian. I write queer historical romance that takes place anywhere from the 1750s to the 1950s. And that's really it. Sorry. I really need like a better, exciting way to introduce myself, but today's not the day. I'm going to figure that out.
I keep telling her waistcoat rippers.
Oh man, for years you've been saying it, and it's such a missed opportunity.
Like, do you want me to call you again and start it over? I was like, do you want me to call you again and start it over? You can include the All right, perfect. And Adele Buck.
I am Adele Buck, and I write contemporary cishet romance. I have been self-published up until now. I just recently announced that I signed a 3-book deal with the new Harlequin sexy contemporary as yet unnamed line, which used to be Desire.
Oh, that's where it came from.
And Renee Dahlia.
I write everything. Contemporary and historical romance, mostly queer, a few het books which are queer as well, really. I've got, I think, 9 books with HarperCollins Australia and 1 with Carina Press, and the rest are mostly indies. Yeah.
Perfect. Sounds great. Oh, and our last one. All right. I want to pronounce. Hello, I'm Catherine, your moderator. And then I want to. Can you pronounce your first name for me so I don't completely butcher it?
Sure, Kosoko.
Kosoko?
Yep.
Beautiful. We're just doing introductions right now. So, Kosoko Jackson, tell us who you are.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Kosoko Jackson. I am the author of Adult Rom-Coms. My sophomore book, A Dash of Salt and Pepper, just came out last week from Berkeley Romance. I write adult rom-coms that focus on happy stories for Black queer men. I also write YA fiction too, spanning across the genres. And yeah, my parents used to be big activists back in the days. For anyone Black who might know this, my grandmother's home was the headquarters of SNCC, which was a organization that was used during the civil rights era to give like student activists. My mother was a Black Panther, so I have a huge like lineage back to like activism.
Perfect. Wow. Love that. So speaking of which, I want to especially talk about the fact that, because of the HarperCollins union strike, it's been really wonderful seeing authors, talk about what that union strike looks like for them, and not in a way of like, it's really welcoming seeing the support they're having and the way that they're, writing letters, signing letters, being very vocal about the fact that, these employees need to be paid more. So I really want to talk about first, like what it means for you to be an author and, to give these people your support. And then I'll start with Kat.
Sure. Well, if there's anything that the past month has really driven home is exactly how much work the workers who are currently striking do. You know what I mean? Like it is, I have a book coming out in June. So like we're in the, like this would be a very busy time. Okay. You know, but the workers who would ordinarily do all of that are on strike. And so it is like, this ought to be really alarming for HarperCollins management, right? Like you would really hope. But these people who, I think that we all get the feeling that like when we sign with a publisher, we're kind of trusting our careers with a corporation, which is not always like a terrific feeling, but we're doing it anyway. But it's really the teams who at the publishers who are doing all of this work, and like we're all in it together. And I want these people who are so important to me and my career and my bottom line and also my readers to be paid like what is barely even a fair, like what they're asking for is like barely even fair. You know what I mean? Like it's so minimal that, yes, I am so frustrated. I'm in a, like, I hate to make it where it's like the amount of like kvetching I've been doing over the past month about, I am so frustrated. Like the amount of ill will I currently am experiencing towards HarperCollins could like fuel a rocket ship. And I think that that's pretty much where all the HarperCollins authors that I've spoken to are in the same like level of like, are you kidding me? Like you can't even pay the people who are your legal employees like a decent amount of money. Like what am I supposed to infer from this? I, a person who cannot strike and don't have any bargaining rights, you know? Yeah. That was like my chillest version of that speech. My entire family has heard like the much less redacted version of it many times over the past few weeks.
Is it just a lot more cursing and longer sentences in it?
Some crying, some like, you know, slamming your palm on the table, you know, like, yeah.
And then Olivia?
Well, for me, this hits home in a couple of ways. I have never gotten an advance for my work. It's always been royalty shares. And then last week, I was offered my first ever advance, and it was for translation for the Feminine Pursuits series. And it wasn't, you know, it wasn't like a life-changing amount of money, but like this was the first time that somebody had ever come and offered money on the table. And I was like, you know what? We're not doing this. Like there's a strike on and I'm not going to sign a new deal. And this is a great milestone in my career. And I'm so furious that I have to turn it down. It's the right thing to do, but it's like the fact that HarperCollins has just been sitting there with, I think there was the one letter, that incredibly tone deaf, ridiculous letter that clearly demonstrates no knowledge of the situation or caring for it. I don't think I've seen any authors actually supporting HarperCollins's actions in any of this, which is very gratifying because they don't really have a leg to stand on, like from an organizational or ethical standpoint. And we all know,
to
like,
be fair, there have been a few that have been very quiet.
well, yes, but that's fine. They can stay quiet. And yeah, but so part of it hits really personally. And the other one is that I spent like the whole first part of the pandemic researching historical labor movements for a HarperCollins book. And so I am just like, did you not read this? I sent this to you.
Well, the people who are striking read it, right?
Presumably, yeah, maybe. No, it's really exciting to see, like, not only the HarperCollins strike, but the nurses strike, maybe like the talk of a wildcat strike for railroad workers. There's a few university strikes, Starbucks, like this new wave of labor and organizing is so gratifying, because as soon as you start poking into the history, you realize how much we've gained from labor movements of the past, and like how many of the things we just take for granted were really fought for with blood, sweat, and tears. And we've needed a labor movement for a long time in this country. And it's really glad that there's strikes like this that we can actually support, even if we're not striking ourselves.
And then Kosoko?
Yeah, I mean, trying to echoing what everybody else has said, but also just thinking about like the marginalized staff members who
Mhm.
are living in this incredibly expensive city, who are out there in the cold right now, and the sacrifices that they're making are not small. And it feels very disingenuous, especially after a lot of the Black Lives Matter movements and about these statements that HarperCollins put out and such, that this is just kind of how, after the light has moved away, that you return back to these old practices. Like many people said, I have a HarperCollins book coming out next fall, I believe. Time is a mystery. And so like, who knows what the strike will be like in fall? Who knows what the future will be? I like selfishly and fairly happy that I'm far out, but like, that's still a thing. It was my largest advance that I ever had. And it's just a weird place to be in as a queer marginalized author.
And then Renee?
I come at this with a really different perspective because I live in Australia and we have really great unions here and we have really good labor laws. Like every time I read anything about American labor laws, I'm just like, what? How? What do you mean you don't have 4 weeks of leave a year? Like, what do you mean your minimum wage is not $17 an hour? Like, how are you people living?
We're not.
But it's because we have
we're
really
not.
great labor. You know, we have great unions here and they've worked really hard. And the discussion that we have here is a different one. It's like, do unions have too much power and are they gone too far? And it's like, well, no, because they need to exist. And the fact that the trained people get like 8 weeks of leave a year plus all these other benefits, well, okay, they've got a great union who's pushed for all this stuff. And maybe all the other unions should do that for everyone else. But
I don't really want tired people driving the trains. I'm just going to say it. Like,
well, the
let them
ferries,
be happy and well rested.
the ferry people have the most like incredible, yeah. And it just staggers me to read what these American HarperCollins people are striking for. And I'm like, but that's not even the minimum. Like, how? Yeah, I just find the whole thing just really disconnected and difficult from the lens that I'm from. So, yeah.
And then Adele?
Well, first of all, trust me, we also have those conversations in America. Do the unions have too much power? Excuse me? And oftentimes it seems to happen in the context of teachers' unions, which is especially out of touch. And like, well, it's not out of touch, it's just completely disingenuous is what it is. I come to this, sort of my perspective is sort of similar to Kosoko's in one way, is that I know what it feels like to be a family member of someone who's striking, and because I'm going to out myself as a very old person now. I was in 1998, I believe it was 1998 or 1999. I was in college and I found out through the evening news that my father was on strike, which is not to say anything about the evening news or striking. It has everything to do with pilots do not communicate well. But my father was an Eastern Airlines pilot. And they had been purchased by a man who had purchased another airline and made a lot of promises to the unions and then proceeded to shatter them like a bull in a china shop. So the Eastern Union knew that when he purchased Eastern, that there was going to be trouble. And so they immediately struck. And sadly, that did not end well. He basically stripped the company for parts and sold it out. And then, you know, my dad went on to do a bunch of different things and all of that. But I also come from my first career was I was an actor. And so, especially in my first book, Acting Up, the heroine is a stage manager, and stage managers in equity productions, actors equity productions, are the ones who are required to make sure that all of the union's regulations are met. So like you need a break of X amount of minutes every N hours, that kind of thing. And so I made sure that I put that bit of reality into that book, because that is part of her job. It's part of her life. It's part of, you know, she's helping to keep the actors and the crew safe. So yeah, I come to it from a bunch of different ways. But yeah, having a family member striking is incredibly stressful. And one of the things that has been said about the pilots who struck for Eastern Airlines in the late 80s is that there is, to my knowledge, was not one single intact marriage that came out of that action, including my parents. So it's an incredibly stressful thing to do, and it's not something that is ever taken lightly.
Mm-mm.
And then, so you said your family was, your mom was a Black Panther. What was the, I'm trying to think of the saying it. How did their history of activism affect your growing up? Like, how did that play a role in it?
This was a long time before I was born. So it was.
You're like, I'm not that old.
I'm like, yeah, hold on.
Not as old as me.
So it was even before she met my father. But my whole family is activist centered. I went to the Million Man March with my father. So I think it's just really influenced like how I look at the world, and the idea that like the benefit of the group is better than the individual. It's also in some ways influenced how I view like pros and cons, and figuring out like what is worth fighting for and what isn't worth fighting for, but also in the reverse, like understanding that in some ways being able to strike is a privilege. Not everybody can do it. I've already heard of some editors who are returning to other jobs or who might have to go back to HarperCollins, and there's no reason that we should feel like those people are weaker than others. Like, we live in a society where we have to pay rent, especially in New York City, and HarperCollins also understands that. And that's a big thing. Like, there might come a time when that's a choice that people have to make, and that's hard.
And then, you talk about like knowing what is worth fighting for, which is really interesting because, that's a whole theme in romance, is like knowing when to, knowing when the two characters should let go, but hoping that they get back together, which is really exciting about how that plays into the work. And so I wanted to ask Olivia, you said that you had done some research about textiles and unions, and I wanted to ask how that factored into your work.
Well, it's really fascinating. My research focused, I was writing about a silk weaver, and so my research focused around textile mills, weavers. They were called combinations at the time, but I also looked as well into like cooperative movements, because those were starting in very early days as well, like kind of starting in Scotland and moving down, like worker-owned collective shops. And one of the things is how messy this history can get, like the choices that people make. Everything's very complicated. It's really easy. It's kind of like, it's really easy to say, okay, well, unions are important, we need to support the unions, and all of that is true, but there's also some very bleak, very messy history behind it. So I read about the Luddite movements, which, we still use that term today about anti-technology, but they were objecting to mechanization and industrial looms that were taking jobs from like home-based weavers. And one of the reasons they objected to those jobs being moved into factories is that the factories could hire women for those factory jobs and pay them less than a licensed guild member weaver who had his own loom and knew what to charge and was weaving everything by hand. And so there were like several steps that the factory owners could skip by setting up like industrial looms and hiring women and girls, like very young girls, at like starvation wages. And so the weavers couldn't always attack the big industrial looms, so they would attack like the like they would attack women in their homes. Like, I'm not saying like always, but like it got really nasty at times, and a lot of it was very gendered. Like, these are men's jobs traditionally, men should be paid men's wages, that kind of factors in. It also kind of impacts like queer history, just because a lot of the people on the margins who were moving from like town to town were extra marginalized. There were queer people, there were Jewish people, there were, especially in the textile industry in Britain at the time. There's a wonderful study about like Jewish history in Essex and the rag industry and like secondhand clothing, and it's fascinating stuff. But the Luddites were really even with all the messiness, they were correct that the factory owners were doing this just to make more money for the factory owners. They weren't improving anybody's lives. They were making a lot of people's lives significantly worse because factory work was dangerous. It was low wages, and it was easy to replace somebody if they got injured or sick. So the Luddites were a threat to this. So laws were passed making frame breaking a capital felony. So they would execute you for it. And at one point, according to Eric Hobsbawm, one of the great historians of this age, there were actually more soldiers being used to quell Luddite movements in England than Wellington had taken to the peninsula during the Napoleonic Wars. Like, he has the statistic. He's like, here's your citation. And I was like, that's wild. So we think about like Waterloo and this bit, and like, no. More soldiers than that were actually fighting the lower classes of England over labor relations.
Oh, see, now I want to read like a whole like paper about this. Like, I know you talk about it in the romance novel, but like now I want to be like, okay, let's do a deep dive. Like, I want like a 30-minute HBO special where I could just quickly.
Well, there is, I mean, yeah, I wrote one book about that, but there is a non-HarperCollins romance about that. And it's called Starlight by Carrie Lofty. And the hero is a duke, an astronomer, and he inherits a textile mill that he's planning on running very lazily. And the heroine is the union organizer who like butts heads with him. And it's really like boots on the ground type union organizing. She lives in one room with her family. It's not like this North and South romanticized heroine type stuff. It's like she's doing this for her dead mom or her dead dad. I forget which one.
One's dead. But he says called Starlight.
Doesn't Courtney Milan's Duchess War do something similar?
Does the Duchess War have like? I know I'm thinking of the. Am I thinking of the Governess?
Governess game. The Governess game is not a union story.
No,
but
but the Duchess War is not quite union, but it's a factory owner who's trying to make reparations, and
yeah.
It's sort of similar thing, I guess.
Just so I can make a note of which book about them and see if they're to stop through the Hopper. Was it Starlight by? Was that the name of it?
Oh yeah, I can put that in the chat. And could you mind repeating that? You were kind of cutting in and out, and we missed a lot of that.
I pay a lot for Wi-Fi. That's not very great, but it's just fun. I'm really interested. I mainly want to talk about that aspect, but I was talking about how I wanted to note like all the books that were being talked about so I could put them in the Hyperlinks column. But now I'm curious about how, how does the workplace appear and like is talked about through this is surprisingly very Comcast because we only have like Comcast and they're glorious. But I want to talk about like how does the workplace appear in your guys' books, but also like, Adele has written about the stage manager and how, they're like they make sure that employees get breaks and things like that. And so I'm curious about whether or not, there you go, acting up. But I'm curious about how do you all represent the workplace in your novels, whether or not it's just like simply saying like my character works this job and it's that, or is it more like, do you like dive in? Do you want to talk about union stuff in the future? Like, will this strike affect how you view workplace romantic comedy settings, if that makes sense? And then I'll start with Renee.
Messily would be the answer.
Elaborate.
I mean, some of it is character driven, and I think you can't, as an author, you can't help infuse your books with your general worldview. And yeah, I don't know. It's messy. I think idealistically, I would like to have been more overtly pro-union in my books, but I probably have tried to balance that line between being vague on descriptions and letting the reader kind of make their own choices. I don't know. I just listen to Olivia and I think, oh man, I'm not worthy. I write a Luddite book and it's such light touch that it's like not even really about the Luddites at all.
We all listen to Olivia and Kat and go, I'm not worthy. I'm sorry to say. It's just-
It's called over-researched.
Yeah, this is people who write historicals. I'm just no. I'm a librarian in my day job. Doing more research, like a lot of intensive research. I'm just like, no, my brain is tired.
Yeah, and I think also like I have a strange family background. My father is a school teacher and has always been in the teachers union, and like teachers in this part of the world strike very regularly, at least once a term. So that was just standard growing up. But his family are Russian aristocrats, and that's where my Twitter handle comes from. It's the Russian last name. And so there's this sense of, I was talking to someone the other day that there's this sense of, well, we paid reparations because we got kicked out and had to run away, but there's so much privilege that comes with that. Like there's so much educational history in my family, and yeah, it just means that the whole lens for me has been a messy journey, and trying to, I don't know, reconcile all these different ideas and work out where I sit on everything.
Yeah, there's interesting stories to be written about like whether or not Russian aristocrats who fled like the revolution did actually meaningfully make amends. Like
Just ran away.
yeah, because it gets tied up with things like you say, there's educational privilege, there's a prestige that comes with it. I've been reading about like Gilded Age Paris, and so like Russian aristocrats throwing wealth at jewelry houses is just like it's staggering the amount of money, even before you account for inflations, like the amount of money being tossed around by people who are like, oh, I can never go home again, but I have these millions, hand me a diamond. Like, and it's like you didn't earn any of that. It really makes you, there was this is a personal bugbear. There was a lovely, beautifully written novel from a few years back about, I think it's called A Gentleman in Moscow. And it's about a man under house arrest in a hotel after like the Russian Revolution. And it's like, he was an aristocrat and he's very nice and he's very kind to all the servants and the peasants who are now supposedly his equals and all this stuff. And it's all this stuff about how charming he was and how much he misses his old life and all this stuff. And I'm like, dude, this is not, people were dying. Like, this is not something you get to be nostalgic about. And everybody found it like so sweet and charming. And I just could not get over that like mental obstacle.
Well,
Yeah,
this is
like
the
I
whole-
say to people, there's a reason there was a revolution. Like we didn't run away for fun, like shits and giggles. There was a reason that people did an uprising and we had to bolt.
Yeah, and there's like, I love the Anastasia film, but like sympathetically the Tsar and his family, no, like just this wave of like, oh, the plight of and I'm like, let's talk about the plight of starving Russian peasant children. I mean, maybe not, because it is a giant bummer, but
If you want a really good romance that deals with those types of issues, my former agent sister Diana Biller wrote The Brightest Star in Paris, which has to do with the Paris Commune.
That's been on my list forever, and the Paris Commune is terrifying. I love it.
Yes, and it's really good, and it also has angry ghosts.
I did not know this. I didn't know about the
Very
Commune. For some reason I thought it was like a contemporary, but now it's like
no. I have the inside line on Diana Biller because we were early. Now my former agent, but she and I were very early clients of my former agent, and so we shared a lot of stuff, and so I feel like I have got the Diana Biller connection.
Yeah, and like you don't really want to endorse the full bloodthirstiness of the Russian Revolution or the Paris Commune, but like,
I mean, sometimes you do. Sometimes you do.
The angry ghosts really do.
I mean, like a lot of people say, you should write some of your family history into books. I'm like, yeah, I don't know that I've got my head around how to do that yet. Like there's the glamour bit that I guess would probably sell, but there's the bit where I haven't reconciled how I fit in all of that. And yeah.
It's a lot to unpack.
It's okay to not work out personal psychological problems through commercial fiction. It's okay. Like,
Probably all in there. Like if anybody read all my books in order, they would be like, oh, there's Renee's therapy all in one go.
Like a trauma timeline where you're like, oh, okay. Now I understand.
I can pick the moment when she broke up with her ex, and I can pick that moment where she... Yeah, no, don't do that. Read them out of order, and then you won't realize, hopefully.
And oftentimes they get this stuff wrong anyway, so it's, like I was an actress for 10 years. I've written 4 books about actors, people in theater, acting, whatnot. Very little of my life is on those pages. So yeah.
Yeah,
And
I
then
mean,
the-
I don't purposefully put myself in the books. It's just a subconscious thing that I worry about. But I think
Yeah.
that's just that anxiety of being an overthinker.
yeah.
And then
Yeah.
Kat,
Oh, go ahead.
you're good. Wait, did you want to finish your thought?
Oh no, I had no thought. Sorry. Go ahead.
Just vibes. I want to make sure I was like Kat, how does the workplace or like the work environment appear in your books? Like, how do you think it will? Like, do you think that like the union, like, do you think? Well, I guess unions are very historical. So, how does that play into?
Yeah, honestly, the unions haven't come up until the series that I'm currently researching takes place in the 1950s and 1960 in New York. And specifically, it takes place in the newspaper business, which was and is highly unionized, from like every single job you could do at a newspaper, at least in New York, like you were in a union. And like, I mean, famously, the papers went on strike in 1963, and there just simply were no newspapers for like 3 months. And it wound up being devastating for the industry. And also like it changed the way people consume news. So like, yeah, it's come up a lot with this series, but I haven't written any characters before that who would have been in a union, I don't think. You know what I mean? Like I'm writing people who are like, just sort of like maybe raising some pigs, or like, like secretly writing like fan fiction about their enemies or whatever. Like, you know what I mean? Like they weren't doing like guild type of work. But yeah, now I'm like knee deep in like how the baseball union got formed, which is like super interesting. And I have to keep reminding myself, literally nobody wants to read about baseball unions in my romance novel. So
I mean,
instead,
I disagree strongly.
Yes, they do.
And I know that there's at least one person in this audience who is also disagreeing, and her name's Katie Casey.
I am like trying to rein myself in and instead like bore my family. Like nobody in this house ever anticipated a world in which they were going to deal with 6 months of like baseball small talk. But like when I go, they keep going, you don't even like sports. And I'm like, okay, but conceptually I might, but like, yeah, yes. Anyway.
Kat, I've never seen a hockey game, and I am slightly obsessed with hockey romances. Don't ask me why.
I was raised watching baseball, and like, so I have all of the like your usual host of American weird nostalgic dad vibes about baseball, you know what I mean? Like, and so I've got that, but I didn't expect unions to enter into this. I also didn't expect like a 1960 gay romance to enter into it, but like, you know, here we are.
Here we go. I do want to tell people in the chat, but also on the screen where I can see them, that if they want to ask any questions for our panelists, then they could drop the questions in the little chat box, and then I will relay the messages as well. So if you have any questions, make sure you're dropping them in there just so we can do that. You know, I like a lot of I think when someone had mentioned earlier is that, you know, with striking comes a certain privilege, and, you know, especially if you're marginalized or you're part of that community, or if you're like someone who, you know, may have to go back to work because, you know, like you all said, like New York is expensive, bills need to be paid, your landlord does not care about your morals. So I'm wondering, in a way though, does, like, as authors, would you say that, like, by speaking up and supporting the union, do you think that you have a certain amount of privilege to do so?
I know that I absolutely do. I married money, to put it bluntly. And by money, I mean like a dude with a tech salary, but like, you know, still that's not an author salary. So for me, the fact that I was able to say, no, we're going to turn down this advance and say, we will sign this deal as soon as you have a contract with the union. And being able to like speak up and send letters of support and donate to the strike fund and all of that stuff is because I know that that's not make or break for my budget. And it, like, I don't know, it is not that long ago that I was living hand to mouth, working retail. I was a TA as a graduate student. I did not have a lot of money. I remember the long hours. I remember like how close to zero those numbers got and how stressful that was all the time. If those HarperCollins like employees, well, we know they were underpaid. That's not a disputable fact. But if in an expensive city, deeply underpaid, they still feel the strike is worth it, then I'm absolutely going to support them. That's like, I feel that's an obligation for me because I have the ability to do it. I am obligated to do it.
For me, it's like I'm doing fine, and therefore I have the privilege of not worrying too much about anybody getting mad at me. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not like, that's always a privilege, right? And I also know that, like, even if I'm like very badly behaved, you know, and whoever is like not wanting to give me a new contract, like, still I'll be fine. Like, that's an enormous amount of privilege. And they're like, yeah.
Kind of the same here. The only caveat for me is that I'm not yet traditionally published, and, you know, might this foreclose that in the future? It might. Will I still be fine? I'll still be fine. It would be devastating emotionally. It would not be devastating financially. And I acknowledge that.
There's also like I feel like I'm at the peak of my like middle-aged white lady powers, you know what I mean? Like, and if like I'm at like the peak of my Karen years, you know, and so when I can use that, like when I can like wield that for good, like that's such an opportunity, right? You know, I may as well use that energy for something positive.
I mean, I always tell writers I'm usually on the opposite end of the spectrum in these online conversations about quitting your job. I still have a full-time job. It is my bread and butter. I have health insurance. I am very fine financially. So if I had to like stop writing, like I could. But also I write pretty diversely, so I'm not super worried about that. But like I am also very self-preservationist, which is not a word, but like I ran it by my agent. I made it good. It could be. But like I didn't really think much about, is it going to like drastically harm to like come out in favor of the strike? I just don't see a real world where some man sitting with like twirling his mustache is like, oh, that one person who wrote that comment on that post, we're not buying their book ever again.
Yeah,
Like,
no, they're not going to
it's
remember.
happening.
They don't even know. Look, let's be honest. Like the
Right.
powers that be, they don't even know we exist. Okay, which is like the entire goddamn problem, right? Is that they're
Yeah,
looking
I'm
online.
literally a data line. Like,
Yeah.
I can
here's
say
the
what I
decimal
want,
point.
really. Like,
Also, just look at some of the testimony from the recent lawsuit with regards to the merger of Random House and Simon and Schuster. These dudes not only don't know who we are, they don't know how their business works. Okay? They literally either don't know how their business works or are lying through their face when they sit on the stand under oath and say, oh no, Advance does not have anything to do with how we market a title. Excuse me?
yeah, sure.
What? Yeah, no.
I think my favorite was that one that, oh, it's random. That's why we call it Random House. But I'm ching. And you're like, buddy, no.
I missed that one. Oh,
Yeah, dude was cracking jokes up there. I was stunned.
And then they got their merger shut down.
And they got their merger shut down because the judge was not amused.
highly unamused. And as someone, I work in legal education, that's my day job. And it's and as somebody who looks at these kind of cases, like, not necessarily all the time, but often enough, you can start to really, really recognize when a judge is getting really testy. And that judge was unhappy.
So then I do want to ask, so nice thing is that, a lot of you have said like, you'll be fine, whether financially or morally. So is there like, do you not fear retaliation at all?
I mean, look,
Or you're just like-
I'm a hybrid author, so I have enough indie books that whether I get published with HarperCollins again or not is largely irrelevant. I mean, it will be nice. And I think the next time that if they did take on a book, I would want more. I mean, my Karina book was desperately unlucky because it's a World War I book and they acquired it in 2019 and they were like, oh my God, World War I, it's going to be so big. And then it came out in June 2020. And they didn't do any marketing because they were like, oh, a World War I book with domestic violence themes? No one is going to want that right now. And so it's just kind of sat there doing nothing. I'm like, okay, I'll just indie publish the other two in the series and whatever. And I think there's that hybrid gives you that power of flexibility. So it takes some of that power away from these trad publishers, I guess. But yeah, look, my ex is an engineer. He pays good child support. I'm lucky enough to have a flexible day job writing for a couple of magazines too. So again, it's the income or lack of from books is a glorified hobby, but not because I want it to be a career.
And it's heartbreaking. Like there were some statistics coming out about author salaries out of the UK, I think, in the past few days. And it's something like the top 5% of authors are making 95% of the money or something like that. Like it's increasingly true, like not just working in publishing, like, but working as a creative person in general is increasingly something you can't do for a living, something you can't do for a job, just like financially. And that's making the arts all the poorer for it. Like we need people who've been through a wealth of experiences. I just don't know how, more bluntly to say, people deserve to be happy without working themselves to death. Like,
that really relates to the strike too, because like they're working in the arts too, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
And if you're going to put people in the place where you can't earn a living wage with your job that's like in the arts or supporting the arts, and you're going to relegate that kind of job to people who are second incomes, right? Like that's a certain type of person and a certain type of family and like a, you know what I mean? Like in your, it's, yeah, people who
Yeah.
have a lot of privilege.
You're getting rid of all of the marginalized people by
Yeah.
doing that.
Yeah.
And everybody, you know, that's a disservice to everyone because we miss out on all the really interesting stories.
And then they wonder why publishing is 95% white. Sorry, the number 95 seems stuck in my head, but I'm pretty sure that's like,
It's thereabouts.
Close
Yeah.
enough.
I've got the oddly and low survey somewhere.
It's, I think that it's the, it might be the management. The management is overwhelmingly white. Like
Yeah.
that, and that's, well, I mean, obviously, right? Like big news there, but yeah.
And then there's about 10 minutes left in the conversation. And I do, of course, you know, as a bookseller myself, talking to writers, I always got to know what you're reading, because that's the best icebreaker there always is, even at the end of the conversation. But I also want to know, like, what one book you would recommend right now. So then I can type them in the chat box, but also people can buy them through HarperCollins bookshop link. So what are we first of all, what are we currently reading and like it?
I just finished C.L. Polk's Even Though I Knew the End, and it was recommended by like everybody. And so I did the thing where I was like, everybody can't possibly be right. Okay. And so I put off reading it and I read it all in like 2 hours. It's a short book. So I read it all in like 2 emotionally unhinged hours. I got to the end, like to the final line, and just completely lost it. Like it is one of the most beautiful books I've read all year. Like I think I'd recommend it like unreservedly. You know, it was like a tour de force. I adored it. And in terms of like another book that I'd recommend, it is not a romance, but it is a lovely optimistic book called This Time Tomorrow by Emma Straub. And it is like time travel, and it's like, and I had a lot of feelings because it's about a parent of a teenager, but it's also about a middle-aged person with an elderly parent. And so like I'm like all in there, okay? And I had like excessive emotions that I did not sign up for and didn't ask for, but I got them anyway. And so if you really need to just like cry a lot, then either C.L. Polk's, Even Though I Knew the End, or Emma Straub's This Time Tomorrow are they are just what the doctor ordered.
I will say, if you watch for some reason, so I read This Time Tomorrow, loved it. It's one of my favorite books. It's part of my top 5, which is a series we do at Pals, where it's the top 5 books you read this year. I always recommend the customers to read it right after they watch Everywhere, Everything All at Once, or Everywhere, Everywhere All at Once, just because for some reason, like that movie and then finishing that book, I was just like,
and I did. That's what I did. That's like, I didn't even think about that, but that's what I did. Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. And I think that is such good advice. They're like a package deal. They're like companions. That's so good.
Thank you. And then let's see, Adele.
So I am currently reading Alicia Rye's Partners in Crime.
Mm.
And I'm probably only like 3 chapters into it, but I pretty much, I don't think I've ever read an Alicia Rye book that I didn't at least like, but most of them I love. So that's right up there. And then the book that I would recommend, and I'm sorry you're gonna have to wait a few months for it because I got an arc of it, is Kathy Yardley's Role Playing, which is, it's not one of her Ponto Beach series, but it kind of feels adjacent to it in that it's got people who are gamers, and it's set in Washington, Northeast Washington, I think. And it is, this is my wheelhouse. This is my current wheelhouse. I've started writing almost exclusively over 40, over 50, and her protagonists are the female protagonist is 48, I think, and the male protagonist is 50. And so later in life romance, she is an absolute introvert, total grump. And he is this cinnamon roll who is like absolutely crapped upon by his family, and he's trying to make things right. And so, yeah, it is. I finished it a few days ago. I finished it like in a huge rush, and I was just like, oh, book hangover. Kathy Yardley, please just keep doing what you're doing.
It's funny because I keep seeing that book on Twitter, and
Great.
I mean, it was like, yeah, because I just started trying, because I run the romance display section at PALS, and so I really wanted to make sure I included books that were like, you know, diverse but also age ranges. And so I just started finding romances with characters that are like older than, you know, 40, just because a lot of romances are like, they're always like, I'm 28 or I'm 30, and that's it. So I wanted to make sure that like I was like really excited for role playing. So thank you for mentioning that one.
You're welcome. And also, just so you know, it's
Handy for you. Both characters are over 40.
Put it on my list. My never ending TBR.
Huh?
I'll put it on my never ending TBR.
Yeah, we all have the never ending TBR. Yeah.
And Olivia?
Well, now that my own sapphic chicken book has been launched out into the world, I'm catching up on Emma Barry's upcoming chicken book, which is called Chick Magnet, which is stupidly good. And I knew there was another, I mean, it's wonderful. It's a YouTube influencer who raises chickens basically on camera. Like that's her career. Has just had a terrible breakup, moves to a small town next door to a grumpy veterinarian, sparks, chicken feathers fly. It's darling. It's wonderful. But I knew that there was another workplace romance that I was like, something about this. And it is Emma Barry and Genevieve Turner's Earthbound, where you have the perfectionist engineer at this fictionalized NASA during the space race. And he squares off with the beautiful female head of the computing department. And I think that there is like, there's some kind of, I think they have like a vague union, or there's some kind of like collective action that they take over the course of the book. But she's their representative. She and the engineer are always kind of like butting heads about how much can you expect them to do? How fast can they work? All of this stuff. And meanwhile, the pair of them are sneaking off to a motel to have filthy motel sex, like while they hate each other, but they can't stop doing it. It's a perfect book, and I love every second of it. And like Emma Barry is also one of those very workplace focused. Her early series was like politically like set in like campaigns and things like that. And I know now she's doing these like small towns. They're just, I love them. Earthbound and Chick Magnet.
She's never written a bad book. Like,
I don't think she can.
Yeah.
No.
Like,
I'd love to see her try, but it's gonna
I
be
know.
And as somebody who lives in DC and has like been to congressional office and like, I haven't lived in that world, but I have done lobbying days, and I have you know, I work on Capitol Hill. Every detail about life in DC is just pitch perfect.
I took one of her NASA books to actual NASA and had a conversation about some of the details with like the former head of NASA who was giving us a tour. And he's like, oh yeah, I know exactly who she got that story from. And like, it was amazing.
Yeah.
And Kosoko?
I don't read a lot when I'm on deadline, so I have not read much recently, but I am just recently starting Bloodborne by Tracy Dion, which is a fantasy. What if like the heir to King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table was a Black girl? It very much gives me and really channels early 2000s urban fantasy, which I feel like we are missing, and it's just very, very good. And a book that I would recommend is one of my favorite books, and I'm going to say the name wrong, so I had to look it up. I'm going to say the author's name wrong. Swimming in the Dark by Tomasz Jabrowski, which is very much like, it's set in Poland during the rise of communism, and it's about these two boys who meet during a camp, and they fall in love. And then as they grow older, one goes to the side of activism and one goes to the side of politics, and really towing the line of government, and how basically their love falls apart. And it just seemed really timely with the strike. It's one of my favorite books. It's very short. It's like 250 pages.
And you said it's called Swimming in the
Dark.
Dark. Sorry, typing fast. And then Renee.
Well, I'm a bit of a read a lot of books at the same time person. So I'm reading, my current nonfiction read is called The Confidence Game, and it's by Marie Konnikova, and it's all about con men and the psychology behind them. It's really fascinating. I'm reading Kelly Garrett's Like a Sister, which is a murder mystery. And I've just finished KJ Charles's Masters in the Hall, which is a Christmas novella. It's very cute.
I loved that. Like a Sister was one of my favorite thrillers of the year. That was so good.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying it. I'm about halfway through, so don't spoil it.
I love her stuff. I need to read that one. I
Yeah.
haven't yet dipped into that, but yeah.
It's a very different vibe from her cozies. It's very good.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it so far. I like the way she writes. It's nice. And the other book I would recommend that I recommend to everybody is Cinderella is Dead, which is like a sapphic retelling of Cinderella that twists the whole fairy tale upside down. It's really fabulous and clever.
So I have to like switch back between bookshops, spelling, and typing. You said Cinderella is Dead. That's it.
Mhm.
No. All right, perfect. Well, let me see. It is now 5 o'clock. Our time here has come to an end. I, for one, am devastated, as I should be. Do we have any last closing thoughts? If you could talk to a union member right now, what advice would you give them? What support would you give them straight out? Like kind words?
Just to keep going, I would say, probably. I'm going to the strike tomorrow, I think, so I'm sure I'll have something better to say tomorrow.
We're all in your corner, that we've appreciated all the work you've done over the years, and we're happy to support you striking from the work right now.
Yeah, that we're so grateful for all the work that they've done for my books, and I'm grateful that they are doing this now.
Please take care of yourself. Please do everything you can to make sure that you are okay. Because, I mean, and take whatever assistance is offered, because sometimes people think that they can muscle through and not accept assistance. They think that, but I think collective action in and of itself shows that we do need each other. And please accept that assistance, accept that support, because we are really, really pulling for you.
Perfect. And then before we go, I just want to let everyone know we raised about $1,700 for the strike. So we did it.
That's exciting.
That's
That's
excellent.
amazing. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all to everyone who came, everyone who's donating. That surely means a lot. We dropped the bookshop.org link in the chat with a lot of great recommendations from our beautiful authors and panelists. And that way you can, if you click on the HCP Union Bookshop page, just because I work for bookshops, I'm just going to tell you, if you see the logo appear in the corner, that means you are attached to their page. That way, anything you order through them, whether it's on their page directly or you search through in the box, will be tagged, and they will get their get the payment rolled out for it. It should be about 10% of each sale. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me or bookshop.org, because I will be on the clock for when I log in. But I just want to thank you all for coming, and I hope everyone has a wonderful night.